and welcome to Catholic Current, where we give you an update on events affecting the Church in the United States. From Washington, D.C., I'm Mara Moser. January is Poverty Awareness Month in the Church. We spoke with Joe Jordan, Communications Manager for Social Mission at the USCCB's Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development. All right, well, thank you for joining us on Catholic Current, Joe. Of course, we're now in the month of December, and we wanted to look ahead to January, when the Church will celebrate Poverty Awareness Month. Tell us, just to start, what is the state of poverty in the United States?
Well, thank you for having me, Maura. The state of poverty in this country is a major issue. Just last year, 11.5% of the nation's population was in poverty, which is about 38 million people. And we also know from the census that from 2021 to 2022, the child poverty rate more than doubled at an unprecedented rate, which left an additional 5.2 million children living under the poverty line. Now, that is largely because of the expanded child tax credit expiring last year. So the issue of poverty in our country is certainly what's happening right now, but it's also an issue that is systemic that could impact the future of our children for generations. And so I think it's important to call to mind what Pope Francis said in November for the World Day of the Poor, when he said that poverty is a scandal. The Holy Father said, "Let us not bury the wealth of the Lord. Let us spread charity, share our bread, multiply love. Poverty is a scandal." And I think that part of the scandal that he's alluding to is the scandal of indifference. We see the reality of poverty in our nation, and we can see where it's going. But we as Catholics, our call is to not remain on the sidelines. Our call is to live out our faith as missionary disciples who go to the margins and who share the wealth of the Lord with those who are least fortunate. And so during Poverty Awareness Month, we're able to focus on that call and to take action. When I was in Mass yesterday, I was listening to the responsorial psalm, and the first part of that psalm was, "Lord, let us see your kindness." And I think that's a wonderful prayer that we can keep in our hearts throughout Poverty Awareness Month, because the reality of poverty is different for everybody. And there are certain scenarios where we may sympathize with better than others, certain stories that we may understand better than others. And so I think that if we lead in this mission with a focus on kindness and a focus on gentleness as we accompany those on the margins, then I think our hearts will be more open to those encounters.
Thank you very much, Joe, for joining us on Catholic Current.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
If you want to learn more about poverty in the United States and how you can help, you can sign up for daily emails in our show notes, or you can visit povertyusa.org. On Tuesday this week, Pope Francis celebrated Mass for the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe at the Vatican.
Lo primero que nos viene a la mente es la imagen de la Virgen.
The first thing that comes to mind as we celebrate this feast is the image of the Virgin impressed on the
La
tilma.
imagen de la primera discípula.
It is the image of the first disciple, of the mother of all believers, of the Church herself, which remains impressed on the simplicity of who we are and what we have,
Que no vale mucho.
which is of little value, but which will become something great in the eyes of God.
Imagen,
The image,
la tilma, las rosas.
the tilma, the roses,
Este es el mensaje.
this is the message, simple like that, unembellished, with the security that she is my mother, that she is here.
Que está aquí. Y este mensaje nos defiende de tantas ideologías.
And this image frees us from so many social and political ideologies that so often use the reality of Guadalupe to base themselves in,
Justificarse y ganar dinero.
to justify themselves, and to earn money.
El mensaje guadalupano no tolera
The message of Guadalupe does not tolerate any ideology of any kind.
We are now about halfway through the Advent season. As we continue the journey to Christmas, we spoke with Mar Munoz Visoso. Mar is the Executive Director of the USCCB's Secretariat for Cultural Diversity in the Church. Thank you for joining us here on Catholic Current, Mar. You know, last week on this show, we had Father Dustin Doubt, and he talked about different Advent traditions that I think would be familiar to many of our viewers. This week, we wanted to talk with you about some traditions that maybe they aren't so familiar. So let's start with Posadas, which is a celebration that we have in my parish. Could you talk a little bit about what Posadas are?
Yes, so Posadas is a tradition that people from Latin America, they're very popular mostly in Mexico and Guatemala, but a lot of people have adopted it in this country. And it simulates the journey of Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem and asking for a place to stay because every place was full. And so it simulates, you know, them asking for this place to stay and the people responding to it. So usually the pilgrims, which is this set of Mary, Joseph, usually on a donkey, Mary, you know, very pregnant Mary, you know, and knocking on doors. And each night, this is a novena, and each night, all the way from the 16th to the 24th, usually the novena ends up in the church, right, for the Mass of Christmas Eve. And it's a fun activity to do with the community because again, it involves singing. It's kind of Christmas caroling, but very traditional Latin American, you know, Christmas caroling. And then you knock on the door. There's this whole all-sang dialogue between the ones outside accompanying the pilgrims and the ones in the house receiving the community. And so after this kind of funny exchange, then finally the family opens the doors and of the community. There is some praying involved. Some people pray a full rosary. Sometimes it's just something simple. And then they go with the festivities and offer a whole, you know, feast for the community that they have prepared. It might involve tamales. It might involve atole. It might involve some traditional, you know, Latin American foods for the community. And usually there's plenty to go around. So that's the Posadas. But there's so many other traditions, you know, Christmas traditions also in other Latin communities. Our parish Cabildos is so diverse that there's so many nationalities, you know, involved and represented.
Yeah, and it sounds like a great way to get the whole family involved and also to kind of walk in the footsteps of the Holy Family as a journey to Christmas Day. I wanted to talk a little bit about some Filipino traditions as well. Could you talk a little bit about some Advent traditions?
So the Filipinos actually have a little bit of a similar tradition. It has a different start, but it's also a novena, and it's a novena of masses, also between the 16th of December and, you know, Christmas Eve. And it dates back to the 1500s in the Philippines, where so many people wanted to celebrate, you know, that they had to ask a special permission from the Pope at the time to do it outside, outdoors. And they usually guide these processions, you know, with a star, a very, you know, traditional star made of bamboo, which represents the Star of Bethlehem that guided the Magi, you know, from the Orient to Bethlehem. And so in this case, actually, there are masses, and there are masses celebrated in the evening, although originally it was called Misa de Gallo, the Mass of the Rooster, because it was done very early in the morning. But here in the States, and now that, you know, people are no longer farmers and fishers, usually that tradition takes care, you know, happens, in the evenings between those days until Christmas.
Wow. How about some traditions from African cultures that are celebrated here in America?
Well, as you know, every African tradition is filled with joy. And for particularly Christian traditions, their observances are usually very religious. It had to do with the things that happen at Mass, but then there is also processions out in the street. It's not just the Christmas services. And in many cases, they have the tradition of making gifts to, charities. Like, in Africa, many of them do like orphanages and hospitals and other places, so that they would give gifts, in remembrance of the gifts that, the shepherds and the wise men brought to the child Jesus. But it's always filled with joy. It's a celebration of unity and also a celebration of culture. So there is a lot of local elements that get, included in those processions and on those celebrations.
Mar, what advice would you have for someone who's watching and maybe doesn't identify or isn't very familiar with some of these communities, but sees that there are posadas or a novena happening? Are they welcome to join, or is it more of a kind of a more closed community type celebration?
Oh no, all these celebrations really are meant to be welcoming of anybody who's interested in participating in them. I have walked many Christmases, at our parishes with the community, and we have even non-Spanish speaking, joining the posadas, and even with time, sometimes they have even integrated, songs in their own languages. Like we have a Bangla community, for example, this Catholic community in our parish, and they have joined the celebrations of Our Lady of Guadalupe and others. So I would say just get yourself informed. In most cases, you will see that the community is very welcoming of anybody that wants to celebrate with them. And I would encourage people to experience them, because it's a whole different way of putting yourself, in the situation where you're really preparing for the coming of Jesus. You're really preparing for the mystery that is going to happen on the night of the 24th and the 25th of December. And leading up to the Feast of the Epiphany. And I want to say that because in many of these cultures, the tradition is, we are in the Advent season now. We're not quite in Christmas yet, but sometimes in this society in the United States, Christmas and all the decorations start so early. I remember when I was little and when I first, came to this country, that I was so surprised because we wouldn't put our Christmas tree or our nativity scene, which is very prominent, in our decorations. The nativity scene has to be, in every Catholic home, and really starts, everything starts, not ends, on the 24th and 25th of December. And it lasts until the Epiphany. The Feast of the Three Kings is very, very popular in most countries, certainly most Latin American countries. The parrandas, for example, in Puerto Rico start very early on, also celebrating the Magi. And some children actually get their gifts, not, the night of the 24th, but on the Feast of the Epiphany.
Great. So it sounds like a great way for people to connect to kind of the universal church as well as to their faith as well. So thank you very much, Mar, for joining us here on Catholic Current. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we conclude?
No, I just say enjoy the festivities. Remember that we're still in Advent, but there is a joyful way, very joyful way to prepare for the coming of the Lord, and that these activities, are really a great preparation for it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Catholic Current. You can find out more about any of this week's topics by visiting us online at usccb.org or follow us on social media at USCCB. The show will be on a break until the new year. From all of us, have a blessed Advent and a very Merry Christmas. See you next time.